expressed during the related show are those of the show personalities and guest alone, and not those of Vic Canellis Media Group, its parent, affiliates, or stations. VCMG Live is not responsible for any content, information, or opinions expressed. User bears full responsibility for their reliance on such content, information, or opinions.
Welcome to Making Money with Laura Sanders, a name you can trust. With over 20 years of real estate experience and selling over 150 homes a year, Laura Sanders is the #1 RE/MAX agent in the state of Florida for 2021. Join us each week as we discuss how to make money through buying and flipping homes, to renting versus selling, and everything in between. To join the conversation, call in live 888-994-4995, Studio A.
Hello and welcome to Making Money with Laura Sanders, and I am your host, Laura Sanders. Every week we talk about something that will help you make a little money, save a little money, or maybe just help you navigate the crazy world that we live in. Today, we're going to talk about something that nobody finds to be interesting, but it is something that all realtors and anyone coming from foreign countries like Canada understand all the new changes with FIRPTA. And with me today is Nick Fiorello with JK Closing Attorneys, and we're going to talk about what FIRPTA means for us as realtors. Welcome, Nick.
Thank you for having me.
So you're enjoying the weather, Nick?
Yeah, I have a sweater on.
I know. It's like, it doesn't even look like we're from Florida.
No, I was in Orlando yesterday. It was 34 degrees.
Oh, wow, yeah. A little chilly, because
but
I got my boots on today. So, you and I were talking about some notes, and oh my goodness gracious. First you said, the big change is requiring all payments to be made electronically and no longer will allow paper checks for FIRPTA withholding payments, which are due within 20 days of the closing date. So let's start from the beginning. I'm selling a condo for a Canadian seller, and they do have a social security number here in the United States. How does that work?
FIRPTA does not apply. Because
Okay.
FIRPTA only applies to foreign people, and a foreign person or foreign entity is only defined as somebody who doesn't have their green card. So if they have their green card or they're declared a U.S. resident, then they're going to have a social security number, but
So that's different than the number they apply for.
that's different. So
what's the number they apply for?
No, so they have a social security number in that case.
Okay.
Or some kind of EIN or ITIN. So
Okay.
as long as they have that kind of status within the United States, they're not going to be considered foreign for FIRPTA purposes.
Okay.
So FIRPTA applies to a foreign seller who's not considered a U.S. person. A U.S. person is a U.S. citizen or somebody with that resident status here.
Okay.
So if they don't have either of those, or they're not a domestic trust, a domestic corporation, a domestic LLC, a domestic entity, well, LLCs are a little different, but a domestic entity of some kind, then they're going to be considered foreign.
But sometimes people that are foreign go and apply for a number, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's still foreign,
Yeah.
even though they get this number
Unless
now.
they have the residency status. I'm not sure if that number equals residency status or not.
Yeah, that's where this gets a little confusing. And
Yeah.
now, what I was understanding, and correct me if I'm wrong, if you are the buyer of a property that is FIRPTA and the monies don't get paid correctly, the buyer is responsible, not the seller. Is this true?
The buyer is the one that's responsible under FIRPTA. FIRPTA is
Silly though,
Yeah.
isn't it?
FIRPTA
So-
has to do with the seller, but it's the buyer's responsibility in a transaction to make sure the funds, if required, are remitted to the IRS and timely.
How do you confirm that though?
Well, so typically in a usual scenario, the closing agent's going to be doing that on behalf of the buyer. But at the end of the day, if the closing agent drops the ball and doesn't do it, then the buyer's the one that's going to be assessed fees, interest, whatever the impact of it not being submitted timely is, the buyer suffers that. So, so when selecting a closing agent, it's really important to ask them if they have the protocols in place to be able to do everything they need to do. So now FIRPTA's paperless now, like everything else. So that's the big change here that we're talking about. and they have 20 days to remit this payment. So they need to make sure that they have their account set up with the IRS. That account takes a couple weeks to set up, so they need to make sure that they have everything that submitted properly to the IRS. Make sure that they have the PIN back, because it takes a PIN from the IRS to then validate your account.
Sounds like a headache.
It is. So with all of that being said, the closing agent does all of that, but what happens if they don't? If they don't, they're not liable either, because it's the buyer's responsibility. The buyer is the one that's ending up being liable for anything that isn't done.
So I would say the first thing that should happen is that the buyer, when selecting, now, okay, in most counties, the seller picks and pays, except for in Broward and in Broward and in Dade County. So if you're a buyer in Broward or Dade County, the first thing, if you're buying a property and you've been advised that it's FIRPTA, which I think that that's a whole nother thing, right? What if the agent doesn't tell you it's FIRPTA and you have no idea? That should go back on the E&O insurance of the agent, correct? But let's just say it's FIRPTA. You should be asking the title agent that you choose, because in this case, the buyer gets to choose. Are you familiar with these kinds of closings? Because I think some people might not be set up. They're antiquated.
100%. So that's super important for whoever's selecting a closing agent, because that's negotiable too, as long as, as well as everything else that's in the contract. You can always negotiate it, but yeah, regardless of who's selecting, the buyer needs to ask that question, because what if you're in Palm Beach and the standard's the seller picks?
Right, but you still need to ask that question, and maybe you shouldn't be moving forward with the contract.
100%. And there's some other different
maybe even still get some representation.
100%.
So it might cost you a little bit more in this particular instance, but you want to be protected and having your own representation. So typically, when someone hires JK closing attorneys, hence the word attorneys, you're not representing them per se in the transaction, correct?
In terms of what?
So I was always told that because you're a title company, right, you're representing the transaction.
It's if we're acting as a closing agent.
Right.
So the good thing about us is we're a law firm, so we can represent the parties individually, or if they choose us as the closing agent, then we're representing the transaction. So let's say we're in Broward County, the buyer gets to select a closing agent. We're not representing them as a buyer. We're acting as a closing agent for their transaction, and we're representing the transaction, making sure the transaction gets done smoothly, cleanly, and as efficiently as possible. So in that case, we wouldn't be representing either party.
Right.
And
even though the buyer picked you, I would think you're a little bit more lenient towards the buyer.
It's
hence why I typically don't allow title companies to represent my seller, whether they're attorney driven or not, because they don't need to be attorney driven when representing the seller if they're managing the transaction, which there are some misconceptions about this.
I always think that the opposing party who doesn't select a closing agent should have their own representation.
Right.
And I'm not biased because I'm an attorney. If I wasn't an attorney, I would want to be protected, especially in Palm Beach County or in the other states, the majority of the states where a seller chooses the closing agent for the buyer. Imagine that. It doesn't necessarily make sense to me. And so when you're a buyer, that's a big purchase. It doesn't matter if it's a $50,000 condo or a $2 million house. It does not matter what it is. It's a big transaction at the end of the day. And there's a lot of, not liability, but a lot of risk when you're spending that much money. So why would you have the other party's company as the only company looking out for you?
Right. I agree. I agree. So you did talk about closing agents need to set up an account with the IRS to remit these, but the buyer has to be careful because the closing agent does this on behalf of the buyer, but ultimately the buyer is responsible. This is scary. So when you are looking at these listings, and even myself, I'm very well versed in real estate, and this scares me because I have to depend on, if I'm in Palm Beach, their closing agent's going to do this, right? So that's when I say to them, you should have representation. You should have an attorney. You said another big change has to do with publicly traded foreign corporations. And if they convert to a public traded domestic corporation, then that would provide for exempt from them withholding? What does that mean?
So usually the way it worked before is when you have a foreign publicly traded company, when they would re-domicile to the United States, meaning making themselves a United States entity, that would trigger a FIRPTA tax event. So they wouldn't really want to do it. What would be the benefit of doing it at that point? So now the United States and the IRS has taken the position, let's make it easier for these big time companies to come over, these foreign publicly traded entities, to come over and do business and transact their business and do everything in the United States. So they removed that essentially and made it easier for them to become a U.S. entity without triggering that FIRPTA tax, event basically to transfer it to a United States entity. So it's made it definitely easier and more attractive to come to the United States to transact their business, so they're not hit with a huge tax, event right upon doing so. What would be the motivation at that point to come?
Right.
They don't have motivation, so now they do.
And then as far as if you're 300,000 and less, it's 15% tax. If you're over 300, then up to $1 million, it's 15%. And then you said, or to 0% if the exemption is met. Residential property, buyer's individual, buyer or buyer's family occupy the property 50% of the time. So what does that mean?
So standard FIRPTA is, if you just think about it plainly, it's a 15% withholding from the purchase price amount, not what you net at the end, but the gross amount. So it's it's based on the purchase price.
Okay.
So let's say you have a $200,000 mortgage, it's a $300,000 house. You're not holding it on the $100,000 that's left. You're holding it on the $300,000.
Okay.
So it's 15% of that. So you're starting at 15% for all foreign sales.
Okay.
So if you're a foreign seller, you're looking at 15%. There are ways to change that around, but certain things have to be met. So when you're a foreign seller, this is a thought process a foreign seller must have when they're selling and listing the property, and for the agent as well.
Okay.
It really depends on the buyer, because that buyer there's an exception, and that buyer has to meet certain credentials, and the transaction has to meet certain credentials. So first and foremost, the property has to be residential.
Okay.
So in this case, it's residential. Boom, knock off the first task. Second, it has to be the buyer has to be an individual. So you can't have any entities purchasing the property.
This is buying somebody's actual
This
FIRPTA
is
property.
buying a FIRPTA-based
Seller.
property. Yeah.
Right,
So
okay.
when you have a FIRPTA seller, you're thinking about this.
So you can't buy it in an LLC from the FIRPTA.
No, you could.
But what would be the
this exception wouldn't apply.
Okay.
So we'll talk about that after. The third item is the buyer or the buyer's buyer's family have to occupy the property for 50% of the time the property is being occupied in the first 2 years.
Okay.
So it doesn't have to be occupied by the buyer or buyer's family for a year of the 2 years. It depends.
So you could do 25% this year and 75% next year.
You don't have to do that either. It just depends on the occupancy status of the property. So if you plan on leasing the property, then you have to make sure that you're there more than the lease time of the tenant in the property. So let's say you have a 4 month, we'll use a 4 month lease.
Then you need to be there 5 months.
So you need to be there 5
or 4.5 months.
4 months and a day.
Okay.
So then that means that let's say it's 100 days. Let's say you have a 50-day lease. You need to be there 51 days.
Okay.
So it's occupied for 101 days. It's more than 50%.
Okay, that makes sense.
And that's for the first 2 years. So there's things that both sides need to consider here. So when you're a seller, you have to consider this type of item as a buyer. And then when you're a buyer, you have to consider whether you're buying a property. And if you want to buy it in an LLC, that seller might not accept your offer if they're versed on this exception. And the fourth part of the exception is that if the purchase price is $300,000 or less.
Oh, so their tax changes if you're going to live there more time than not.
Yeah.
Their tax.
So their tax can get completely removed if all of these items are met. So properties residential, The buyer's an individual. The buyer or buyer's family occupy the property 50% of the time.
So you can
or
determine
more.
this, and if they can't lie to you though.
In this situation, you want to do a buyer FIRPTA affidavit. So they're attesting that they're going to meet all of this, and then with that, the closing agent can move towards closing, certain that they're not going to have to remit anything because all of those items of the exception are met.
We're going to go to a commercial break, and when we come back, we're going to continue on with this because honestly, this is super important and people don't realize the ramifications. So stay tuned to see our sponsors, and we'll be right back.
At JK Closing Attorneys, we do all of the same things that a title company does, but with the benefits of being a law office. We can help with residential real estate, short sales, commercial real estate, refinances, 1031 exchanges, and FIRPTA withholding.
Contact JK Closing Attorneys today at 954-332-3111. Again, that is 954-332-3111.
Priority One Credit Union of Florida is a welcoming credit union that makes your financial success our number one priority. We offer lower loan rates, higher deposit rates, and common sense local loan approvals, with nationwide access through shared branching.
Hi, I'm Dina Hennessy, President and CEO at Priority One Credit Union. We are open to the community. Anyone can be a member of our credit union, and we would love to have you.
Contact us today at 954-335-5100. You can also reach us at PriorityOneFL.org. Your financial success is our priority. That's 954-335-5100.
You have been watching Making Money with Laura. For more information, contact Laura Sanders at 954-650-0827 or visit her website at thelaurazell.com. And now back to the show.
Hi everyone, and welcome back to Making Money with Laura Sanders, and I am your host, Laura Sanders. So today we're talking about FIRPTA, and I know it sounds boring, and it is boring, but if you're an agent, you do not want to be sued for your E&O. That's all I got to say, because I see that in the near future. You know, people don't realize there's a lot of liability on us for a lot of things. Like, you know, you notice like kind of wavered off to the side about the Chinese buying properties in certain areas. Like, we're still trying to get those affidavits, and so you know, that's one thing. But this whole foreign national, like, you know, FIRPTA thing is another thing that we need to understand. So you're basically telling me that there's how many things? Was it 3 things that you need? 4 things. So what's the 4th? Because we did not get the 4th.
So the 3, I'm going to start from the top.
Okay.
Properties, residential. The buyer's an individual. The buyer or buyer's family lives in the property for 50% of the time it's occupied. And 4, if the purchase price is $300,000 or less, then if the buyer signs this buyer FIRPTA affidavit, then the withholding will go from 15% to 0.
Okay.
So no withholding.
What if it's $301,000?
So if it's $300,001 and higher to $1 million, then the withholding amount drops from 15% to 10%. So you get a break there.
But if you get them to sign all these things, does the 10% go away too?
No. So
why is that?
Ask the IRS.
Okay.
Because they give a break for that, so not the full withholding is required. But then when you cross the $1 million mark, then it's the 15%. I guess
again,
they want to make their money. I guess. So.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
So then you said, and then the only other change is for real estate investment trusts and C Corps for investment. They repealed a rule that required the actual people in charge to not be foreign or FIRPTA to apply, but now they have backlash by real estate community, so they scrapped it, and basically whether the entity is domestic or not, and if they're domestic, no tax. What does that mean?
So in 2024, the IRS made a protocol or procedure that when there's a real estate investment trust or a C Corp, they had to go through this tracing mechanism to determine who was in charge of that entity. So in a lot of these cases, it's not just a person in charge of them. So they would have to go back through a chain of different entities to find out who the actual person in charge was. So sometimes there's a whole step-by-step plan. You have entity 1 managed by entity 2, which is managed by entity 3, which is managed by entity 4, and so forth. So it became a burdensome tracing task, and there was a lot of backlash in the real estate community and with investors in particular, because investors use this strategy where it was becoming too burdensome to meet the demands of the IRS. So with all that, this past month, the IRS came out with a policy update or something along those lines, stating that basically it's not the look-through to the owners is not necessary anymore. The test, whether FIRPTA is required, is whether the entity, that C Corp or in real estate investment trust, is a domestic entity. So if it's a U.S. entity, no FIRPTA. And if it's a foreign entity...
But why can't a Canadian open up, and I'm using Canada just because it's easy, right? And they're usually the majority of the FIRPTAs we do, I would say. Why can't a Canadian go and open up a, oh my God.
Well, a lot of investors do.
Yeah.
You have a lot of investors that come down here and that do this often, and they have entities that they open and buy property in the entity name.
Right.
However, some condos, some other
don't allow that.
Don't allow it.
So you wouldn't buy there, obviously, more than likely.
But then it limits the pool. So then they have a decision whether they want to invest or not.
Right.
And then sometimes they outweigh, the risk, or they don't know. A lot of the seasoned investors they know. Yeah. So, and most of the time, an LLC is the easiest entity to own and operate. So if you have a multi-member LLC, the test is the LLC domestic or not? If it's domestic, no withholding. So you see it a lot of the time where they have a multi-member LLC. There's 2 people. They're usually 2 foreign people, but because it's a multi-member LLC and they're holding property, it's a U.S. LLC. So because it's a U.S. LLC, no withholding. So this is
basically a runaround. Like, this is a way to circumvent the system.
I wouldn't say circumvent, but yes,
Okay.
Yeah, definitely.
And if somebody was thinking about, well, just in general buying property, what would be a good way for them to get a hold of you?
Several. So you can call 954-779-5000. That's our office. We did have a texting, but it's not working right now. We're working on a new number. So when I have that new number, I'll let you know.
Oh, what happened with that?
The programming system.
Do not use AI, people. I'm trying to schedule blood work with AI, and oh my God, I text them back, your system sucks.
Yeah, don't communicate with AI. Or you can email me individually, nick@jkclosings.com, or our legal email, legal@jkclosings.com.
So I would email both, and if you can't get a hold of them, reach out to me, and I will connect you with them. I will get Nick on the phone right away.
Definitely.
Lickety split.
Lickety split, indeed.
Lickety split. So any, foreign nationals is something that I think that everybody should definitely reach out to an attorney, especially someone like yourself. You do trainings on this, so I think that if they're interested and they have an office that they want to have you guys come out to, I'm sure you're more than willing to discuss that with them.
100%.
Yeah, but so tell us any kind of crazy things that have happened lately in real estate. I always like to hear sometimes things that happen, in the market.
Well, recently we got a request to hold remains of somebody's remains.
Was it like ashes?
Yep. So that's something that we've recently...
I've had that before, believe it or not. We found it inside a house that was in foreclosure, and nobody lived in the house. They'd already vacated, and actually there was a freezer with a lock on it, and I kept saying, oh, there's probably a dead body in it, just joking around. And then we end up finding the actual urn, and I said, well, it's kind of like a dead body, right? So what did you do? You said, no, we can't keep it?
No, we're not gonna get involved.
Why would somebody have asked you that?
You never know. never know with people. We get random inquiries every day, and that was just the one that kind of took me back recently. So.
Well, if you're wondering if the market's doing well, the market is definitely doing well. People are buying, and the interest rates have dropped just so ever slightly. So if you're thinking about buying or selling, you definitely need to reach out to me, Laura Sanders, with RE/MAX Direct at 954-650-0827, and let Nick and I work on your deal together to either find you a home or get your home sold for the most amount of money in the shortest amount of time. Until next week, thank you for always listening to Making Money with Laura Sanders. Good night.
Thank you for tuning in for Making Money with Laura Sanders, a name you can trust. To join the conversation, call us at the studio, 888-994-4995 Studio A, or contact Laura directly at 954-650-0827. Laura Sanders, a name you can trust. We look forward to